This is important, and it's happening right now. The Supreme Court looks likely to expand President Trump's power in a major way, and this isn't just about politics in Washington. This could change how government agencies work, who controls them, and how decisions that affect your money, your job, and your safety get made. A lot of people don't realize this, but some of the most important rules you live under don't come straight from Congress. They come from independent agencies, and that independence might be on the line. Stay with me here, because by the end of this, you'll have a much clearer picture of why this matters to you personally. Before we get going, I'd really like to hear from you. When you think about government power, do you feel more concerned about too much bureaucracy or too much power in one office? Just a gut reaction. Drop that in the comments. So, let's talk about what's actually happening. Right now, the Supreme Court is reviewing a case that, on the surface, sounds narrow. It's about whether President Trump can fire a commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission without a specific cause. But you see, this isn't really about one person or one agency. It's about a legal rule that's been around for almost 90 years, a rule that limits how much control a president has over independent agencies. Back in 1935, during Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, the Supreme Court decided a case called Humphrey's Executor. What that case did was say, Congress can create agencies that are somewhat independent from the president. These agencies could have leaders that can't just be fired because the president doesn't like their decisions. The idea was stability, expertise, keeping things from swinging wildly every time power changed hands. And honestly, for decades, that's been the system. Agencies like the FTC, the Federal Election Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, these were built to be bipartisan, slow-moving, and focused on rules, not politics. You might not think about them every day, but they shape things like workplace protections, consumer safety, antitrust enforcement, and even election rules. Now, fast forward to today. President Trump and his administration are arguing something very different. They're pushing what's called the unitary executive idea. Don't worry about the name too much. The basic idea is simple. The president is the head of the executive branch, so anyone enforcing federal law should ultimately answer directly to him. And if they don't, he should be able to fire them. Period. Trump's team says letting independent agencies operate outside presidential control creates unelected power centers. In their view, that's bad for democracy because voters elected the president, not agency officials. And they say if the president is accountable to voters, then the people carrying out federal law should be accountable to the president. And here's where things get very real. Since taking office again, President Trump has already fired more than a dozen officials from independent boards and commissions. Not for misconduct, not for breaking the law, simply because they didn't align with his policy direction. You might hear that and think, okay, that sounds efficient. Clear leadership, fewer roadblocks. And that's exactly why this is such a big deal, because efficiency and control have trade-offs. Now, when the Supreme Court heard arguments, the tone was telling. Several conservative justices openly questioned whether that 1935 precedent still makes sense. Chief Justice John Roberts even described it as outdated, like an old rule designed for a government that no longer exists. Justice Gorsuch was even more blunt. He questioned the idea that independent agencies are somehow separate from the three branches of government. In other words, his view was the Constitution doesn't talk about a fourth branch, so why have we been acting like one exists? At the same time, even supportive justices raised concerns. Justice Kavanaugh, for example, brought up the Federal Reserve. The Fed has long been independent precisely to keep politics out of interest rates and inflation decisions. Messing with that independence, he warned, could have serious economic consequences. And that right there is one of the cliffhangers in all of this. Will the court carve out exceptions, or will it go all the way and strip independence broadly? That answer matters more than most people realize. Now, liberal justices on the court had a very different reaction. Justice Sotomayor warned that giving presidents unchecked removal power could destabilize the entire system of government. Justice Kagan went even further, raising concerns that a president could effectively control lawmaking and enforcement by reshaping agencies at will. And that's not just theory. We're already seeing signs of how this could play out. After Trump removed commissioners at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the agency reversed its stance on proposed safety rules for lithium-ion batteries, the kind used in e-bikes and scooters. That change didn't happen after new studies or public debate. It happened after leadership changed. Also, at the FTC, newly appointed leaders launched investigations that aligned closely with the administration's priorities. At public broadcasting agencies, board members were removed and funding decisions came under pressure. Again, not illegal changes, but a shift in direction driven by leadership control. So here's the bigger question. What does this mean for you? Well, let's slow this down and talk practical impact. Independent agencies touch daily life more than Congress does, honestly. They regulate workplace safety. They go after monopolies that raise prices. They decide whether a product is safe enough to sell. They enforce labor rules. They oversee elections. They influence whether companies can merge or not. If presidents gain direct control over these agencies, policies could change quickly when administrations change. Rules you rely on could disappear faster. Protections could come and go depending on who's in the White House. For some people, that sounds good. Less bureaucracy, faster action, fewer delays. And there is truth there. Agencies can be slow, frustrating, overly cautious. A system built for stability often sacrifices speed. But the other side is predictability. Businesses plan based on stable rules. Workers rely on protections sticking around. Consumers expect safety standards not to shift overnight. When everything hinges on presidential priorities, that stability weakens. And speaking of which, think about the economy. Agencies like the Federal Reserve don't just affect Wall Street. They affect your savings account, your mortgage rate, your grocery prices. Even small changes in perceived independence can shake markets. Investors don't like uncertainty, and uncertainty raises costs. Another thing to consider is precedent. Today, this favor benefits a president you might agree with. Tomorrow, it could empower a president you strongly oppose. Power rarely stays with one side forever. That's actually a concern many legal scholars are raising. They're not all anti-Trump or anti-conservative. They're worried about the system long-term. The ability to fire is the ability to control the agenda, enforcement priorities, investigations, fines, settlements, all of it. Historically, independent agencies were created precisely because Congress didn't want every regulatory decision to flip with each election. The New Deal era shaped much of this structure, responding to economic chaos and corporate abuse. The idea was to build expertise-driven bodies that could operate above day-to-day politics. Conservatives argue that model has gone too far, creating unaccountable bureaucracies. Critics argue the cure may be worse than the disease. Now, the Supreme Court likely won't rule until next year, possibly summer 2026. But the direction feels clear. Even if they don't completely overturn the old rule, they may weaken it significantly. And if they do overturn it, presidents would gain authority to remove officials across dozens of agencies, agencies that regulate labor, commerce, transportation, energy, communications, and more. And you might wonder, can Congress stop this? The honest answer is not easily. If the court says the Constitution requires presidential control, Congress can't legislate around that. That's why this case is so important. It reshapes the balance of power without a single vote being cast. Now, note, I've worked with people who rely on consistent rules to plan their future, retirees budgeting on fixed incomes, small business owners navigating compliance, workers depending on safety enforcement. Sudden policy shifts create stress. They create confusion. They create winners and losers fast. At the same time, I've also seen how inefficient agencies can stall progress and protect their own power. Both things are true. So yeah, this isn't a simple good versus bad story. It's about trade-offs. Accountability versus independence. Speed versus stability. Democratic control versus insulation for politics. What I want you to take away from this is not fear and not blind optimism. It's clarity. Pay attention to who controls the rulemaking body that shape your life. Ask how changes in leadership affect enforcement. Stay engaged, stay informed, and ask questions. And if this topic connected with you, share it with someone who might not realize how much these agencies matter. Power shifts often happen quietly, through court cases most people never hear about. That's why understanding them early gives you context and a little peace of mind. All right, thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you next time.